You're turning fruit into a recurring expense that will cost you $30,000 over the next 20 years, buying produce from industrial orchards sprayed 15 times per season. And you're treating this dependency like it's the only option available to normal people. Meanwhile, old-school Appalachian farmers looked at their quarter-acre once, planted 7 strategic trees in guilds with nitrogen fixers and ground covers, and built permanent food systems their grandchildren still harvest today. The gap between their abundance and your scarcity isn't effort or expertise. It's designed ecosystems versus consumer dependence. Here are the 7 trees hillbilly farmers plant and why observation-based polyculture beats intervention-based monoculture every single time. Number 1. Apples. You've been sold dwarf apple trees at nurseries because they're easier to ship and they make you come back in 15 years to buy replacements when they die young. But hillbilly farmers plant standard rootstock apples that produce for 50 years or more, and one mature tree gives you 200 to 400 pounds of fruit every single year. That's $600 to $1,200 worth of apples annually for half a century from a $25 sapling you plant one time. And while the nursery worker smiles and tells you dwarf trees are perfect for small yards, what they don't mention is that dwarf rootstocks have shallow roots that need constant watering, staking, and fertilizing because they're essentially crippled trees bred for shipping convenience, not production longevity or resilience. Plant standard rootstock bare root trees this January while they're fully dormant. Dig a hole twice as wide as the root spread, but only as deep as the roots currently sit, because planting too deep kills more fruit trees than any disease ever will. Spread the roots out naturally over a small mound of native soil mixed with finished compost. Backfill without heavy amendments because you want roots spreading into native soil, not circling inside a rich pocket like a containerized plant that never escapes. Water deeply once to settle soil and eliminate air pockets. Then mulch 4 inches deep in a donut pattern, keeping mulch 6 inches away from the trunk to prevent collar rot and rodent damage. And here's what separates hillbilly orchards from hobby collections that fail in year 3. They don't plant apple trees standing alone in mowed grass that competes for every drop of water and every molecule of nitrogen. They plant nitrogen-fixing ground covers underneath, white clover or crimson clover, that pull nitrogen from the air through bacterial root nodules and feed it directly to the tree while suppressing weeds and holding soil moisture. The tree grows faster, the soil builds fertility instead of depleting, and you stop mowing, stop watering as often, and stop buying fertilizer to replace nutrients that grass steals before the tree can use them. Choose varieties based on your actual climate zone and required chill hours, not what looks attractive in glossy catalogs designed to sell you varieties that won't fruit in your region. Hillbilly farmers in the South plant low-chill apples like Anna and Dorset Golden that fruit with only 200 to 300 hours below 45 degrees. Northern growers plant Honeycrisp and Liberty that need 800-plus chill hours. And they always plant at least 2 varieties that bloom simultaneously for cross-pollination, because one tree standing alone gives you almost nothing but leaves. And storage matters as much as production volume, which is why hillbilly farmers plant early varieties and late keepers, instead of mid-season apples that all ripen in August when you're already drowning in tomatoes and can't process everything at once. Early varieties like Lodi and Yellow Transparent ripen in July, but only store fresh for 2 weeks, so you eat them immediately or make applesauce and can it. Late-season keepers like Arkansas Black and Granny Smith ripen in October and store in cool basements or root cellars for 6 months, which means one tree planted today gives you fresh apples from your own land until April next year. Number 2. Sour cherries. Sour cherries are the tree hillbilly farmers plant for reliability because they're self-pollinating, cold-hardy to minus 25 degrees, and they produce massive crops even when late spring frosts kill sweet cherries and peaches in surrounding orchards. And unlike sweet cherries that need perfect conditions and 2 different trees for pollination and a 12-foot ladder to harvest from scaffolds you can't reach safely, sour cherries stay compact, bear fruit alone, and hang crops at shoulder height where you can pick standing on the ground without risking your neck or your back. One mature Montmorency cherry produces 50 to 100 pounds of fruit per year. At $8 per pound for organic cherries in stores, that's $400 to $800 annually from one tree that cost you $30 as a bare root whip. Plant them the same way as apples, bare root in January, with roots spread naturally and graft unions at the exact soil level they grew at in the nursery field. But cherries need faster draining soil even more than apples because they rot quickly in wet feet. So if your site holds water after rain, plant on a raised mound or berm instead of in a hole. Space them 15 feet from other trees because sour cherries spread wider than their height suggests. And mulch heavily with wood chips or straw to suppress grass competition and hold moisture during the critical first 3 years while roots establish. Sour cherries ripen in late June or early July, filling the production gap between June strawberries and August peaches when almost nothing else is ready to harvest. And they don't store fresh longer than 3 days, which forces you to learn preservation methods immediately instead of procrastinating until you have bushels of rotting fruit. Freeze them whole on trays, then bag them for year-round pies. Can them as pie filling using simple water bath methods that don't require expensive pressure canners. Dry them into concentrated chewy candy that stores for months in sealed jars. Or make cherry bounce by packing whole cherries with stems into quart jars, covering them completely with cheap brandy and waiting 6 months for homemade liqueur that tastes better than anything sold in stores. Number 3. Peaches. This is where most backyard orchards fall apart completely, because people are still thinking in terms of individual trees planted in isolation, instead of designed guilds, and peaches teach the polyculture lesson better than any other fruit. Hillbilly farmers don't plant a peach tree alone in mowed grass. They plant a peach guild. The tree is the canopy layer, black currants or gooseberries as the understory shrub layer, strawberries as the ground cover, and scarlet runner beans climbing a trellis directly behind the tree for vertical production. 4 different crops occupying one 15 by 15 foot footprint. Each plant serves multiple functions simultaneously. The currants fix nitrogen and fruit in partial shade. The strawberries suppress weeds and hold soil moisture while producing June berries. The beans climb without competing for root space and add nitrogen through bacterial nodules. And the peach gets protection, companionship, and a living mulch system that eliminates 90% of the maintenance work you think orchards require. Think about it. In nature, fruit trees don't grow alone in mowed turf like golf course specimens. They grow at forest edges surrounded by layers of companion plants, and those ecological relationships create resilience against drought, pests, and nutrient depletion. Industrial orchards ignore this reality completely because monoculture rows are easier to manage with tractors and chemical sprayers. But you're not running a commercial operation optimized for machinery access. You're building a backyard food system for your family, and polyculture guilds outproduce monoculture plantings while requiring a fraction of the intervention and rescue. Plant peaches on your earliest well-drained site because they break dormancy fast in spring, and late frosts kill blossoms more reliably than any other common fruit. Choose varieties bred specifically for your region's disease pressure patterns. In humid eastern climates, plant resistant varieties like Contender or Red Haven that tolerate bacterial spot and brown rot without constant fungicide spraying. In dry western climates, you have more variety options because fungal disease pressure is naturally lower. And peach trees planted in guild systems fruit heavily in year 3 instead of year 5, because the nitrogen fixers accelerate growth rates and the living mulch holds moisture through July and August heat when peaches need consistent water most desperately. You're not managing 4 separate plantings that each need individual attention. You're managing one self-regulating ecosystem where each plant supports the others through designed relationships. The strawberries shade bare soil and prevent moisture evaporation during summer heat. The currants tolerate dappled shade under the peach canopy and produce fruit in June before peaches ripen in August. The beans climb vertical space without competing for root zone and actually improve soil while they grow because they're nitrogen fixers. And the peach produces abundantly because it's not fighting grass for resources or standing isolated against pest pressure with no ecological support system. Here's what most people miss completely. Your peach tree isn't struggling because of bad genetics or mysterious diseases. It's struggling because it's isolated, stressed, and fighting grass that steals 40% of the water and nitrogen you think you're giving the tree. Grass roots occupy the exact same soil zone as young fruit tree roots during establishment years. They're direct competitors. And grass always wins in the short term because it evolved specifically to colonize disturbed soil fast and hold it against slower-growing woody perennials. So you water more. You fertilize more. You're treating symptoms of broken design with interventions you have to repeat forever because the underlying system is wrong. Number 4. Mulberries. Mulberries are what hillbilly farmers call insurance trees because they fruit reliably every single year, regardless of late frosts, drought, or neglect. And they produce so heavily that you'll have more fruit than you can possibly use, even after feeding surplus to chickens and pigs. One mature mulberry drops 15 to 20 gallons of berries over a 6-week harvest window from May through July, depending on your variety and climate. And while mulberries don't sell commercially because they're too fragile to ship even 10 miles without turning to mush, that fragility is exactly why you should plant them. Fresh mulberries are completely impossible to buy, which makes your tree irreplaceable. Plant mulberries on the downhill side of a swale or contour berm if you're working with sloped land, because this is where hillbilly farmers integrate passive water management directly into orchard design instead of fighting summer drought with hoses and automatic timers that fail. A swale is simply a level ditch on contour that catches runoff and spreads it horizontally across your landscape, instead of letting it run straight downhill and off your property completely. You dig the swale 18 inches deep and 3 feet wide following the contour line. You pile excavated soil on the downhill side to create a raised planting berm. And you plant your tree on that berm. Every time it rains, water fills the swale, soaks in slowly over hours or days, and recharges groundwater directly in the root zone where trees access it. The tree gets deep watering without you lifting a finger. And because water moves laterally through soil along the contour, the entire berm stays moist while surrounding hillslope areas dry out completely. If you're on flatland, create shallow rain garden basins around your trees and direct roof runoff or surface water into them during storms using simple grading or buried pipe. The principle is identical. Capture water where it falls, slow it down, spread it out horizontally, sink it into soil instead of letting it run away to storm drains that send it off your property unused. And mulberries have deep taproots that mine subsoil moisture once established, which means after year 3, you're essentially done watering even in drought years because the tree is accessing water tables 6 to 8 feet down that surface irrigation from hoses never reaches anyway. Choose varieties carefully based on your winter cold. Illinois Everbearing and Dwarf Black are self-fertile and cold-hardy. Pakistan produces massive 3-inch fruits, but needs mild winters. And all mulberries stain everything purple, so plant them where falling fruit won't wreck patios or driveways you actually use. Let chickens forage underneath to clean up dropped berries and fertilize the tree continuously with nitrogen-rich manure. Or plant shade-tolerant perennials like comfrey and hostas directly under the canopy to catch falling fruit and turn it into mulch in place, while producing their own yields. You're gardening backwards if you're still planting fruit trees in straight rows with mowed grass strips between them like a commercial orchard designed for tractor access and chemical spraying. That design creates problems systematically, then sells you solutions to fix the problems the design itself caused. The grass competes, so you buy fertilizer. The bare soil erodes, so you buy bagged mulch. The monoculture attracts pests, so you buy sprays. And you're trapped on a maintenance treadmill that never ends because the fundamental design is broken at the system level. Industrial orchards use this model because they're optimized for machinery and ease of chemical application, not ecological function or resilience. They accept the maintenance costs because they're selling volume to wholesale markets. But you're not selling volume, you're feeding your family. And maintenance time is time stolen directly from your life. Here's the reality. Hillbilly farmers understood this instinctively through observation. They designed orchards as polycultures, where trees grow with companion shrubs, perennial ground covers, and nitrogen-fixing plants in layered guilds that suppress weeds automatically, build soil fertility continuously, attract beneficial insects, and create protective microclimates. Each plant serves multiple functions simultaneously. The system maintains itself through ecological relationships instead of requiring constant rescue interventions. And once established, these guilds produce more food per square foot than monoculture rows, while needing dramatically less water, less fertilizer, and almost zero pest management, because diversity prevents any single pest species from exploding. Number 5. Chestnuts. This is the first of what hillbilly farmers call grandchildren trees, because you plant it knowing you might not live to see peak production, but your family will harvest massive crops for 50 years or more after you're gone. Chinese chestnuts are blight-resistant, cold-hardy to -20 degrees, and one mature tree produces 60 to 80 pounds of nuts annually, starting around year 7. Chestnuts need full sun and well-drained soil, and they require a second tree for pollination because they're not self-fertile, so plant at least 2 different varieties, like Colossal and Qing, spaced 40 feet apart. And chestnuts don't transplant well once established, so choose your site carefully the first time, because moving a 5-year-old chestnut after roots have gone deep usually kills it. But here's where it gets interesting. Hillbilly farmers don't buy trees from nurseries year after year. They propagate. They graft. One scion cutting from a neighbor's proven 30-year-old tree, plus a seedling rootstock you grew from a nut, equals a free genetic copy of that exact variety. And once you learn basic grafting, which takes 1 weekend of practice and 20 attempts to master, you can multiply any fruit or nut tree infinitely without spending another dollar at commercial nurseries. You become a living seed bank, a grafting library, and your orchard becomes community infrastructure that feeds multiple families through shared cuttings and transferred knowledge. Cleft grafting works reliably for chestnuts, apples, pears, and stone fruits. You cut pencil-thick scion wood with 3 to 4 dormant buds in late winter while it's completely dormant. You cut the rootstock off at knee height and split it down the center 2 inches deep with a sharp grafting knife. You sharpen the scion into a thin wedge and insert it into the split so cambium layers match perfectly on at least one side. You wrap it tightly with grafting tape or parafilm. You seal all cuts with grafting wax, and you wait. 60 to 70% take successfully on your first attempts, 90% success once you've practiced 20 times. And this changes everything because you're no longer dependent on nurseries selling varieties bred for shipping durability and shelf life instead of flavor, nutrition, and regional adaptation. You're selecting for what actually grows in your specific microclimate, what tastes best to your family, and what produces reliably without chemical rescue. You're building adapted genetics through observation, which is exactly how indigenous growers develop thousands of regionally specific varieties over centuries, before corporations centralized agriculture into 12 commercial cultivars sold everywhere. Number 6. Pecans. Pecans are the ultimate grandchildren tree because they don't hit full production until year 12 to 15. But once they start producing, they continue for a century or more, and mature trees yield 80 to 120 pounds of nuts annually. At $14 per pound for organic pecans, that's $1,100 to $1,680 worth of shelf-stable protein and fat every single year, for 80 years. The lifetime economic value of one pecan tree planted this January exceeds $130,000 in nuts your descendants won't buy at grocery stores. Plant pecans in deep, rich bottomland soil if you have access to it, because they're river-bottom trees evolutionarily adapted to deep roots and ample moisture. Northern growers plant hardy varieties like Kanza and Peruke. Southern growers plant Pawnee, Desirable, and Elliott. And all pecans need cross-pollination from a second variety, so plant at least 2 trees that bloom simultaneously. Pecans get massive, 60 to 80 feet tall with equal crown spread, so give them space or plant them as property boundary trees where size becomes an asset instead of a problem. Number 7. Figs. Figs close the system perfectly because they're the easiest tree to propagate, the fastest to fruit from planting, and the simplest to preserve without any equipment or electricity. Figs root from 8-inch cuttings stuck directly in moist soil with 90% success rates. They fruit in year 2, and they dry naturally on the tree or on simple racks in the sun, concentrating sugars into shelf-stable candy that stores for a year in sealed jars without refrigeration or canning. Plant figs in the warmest microclimate you have available, against a south-facing wall or near buildings that reflect heat, because figs need accumulated warmth to ripen fruit properly. Brown Turkey and Celeste are cold hardy to Zone 7. Chicago Hardy survives to Zone 6 by dying back to roots in winter and resprouting. Desert Gold and Cadota thrive in hot, dry climates where other fruits struggle. And in marginal cold zones, you can grow figs in large containers that you move into unheated garages for winter protection, which lets you grow varieties 2 full zones warmer than your ground climate allows. Figs produce 2 crops annually in long-season climates: a light breba crop on old wood in June, and a heavy main crop on new growth in August through October. Let them ripen completely on the tree until they're soft and starting to crack, because figs don't ripen after picking like tomatoes. Then, eat them fresh. Dry them whole on screens in full sun for 3 to 5 days until leathery, or slow roast them in ovens at 170 degrees for 8 hours to make dense, caramelized dried figs that keep for months. These 7 trees represent permanent food infrastructure, not hobby gardening. Apple, cherry, peach, mulberry, chestnut, pecan, fig. Plant them in polyculture guilds with companions, not monoculture rows with grass. Design passive water capture systems that eliminate irrigation dependence. Learn grafting so you stop buying replacement trees. And you've built a regenerative orchard that produces thousands of pounds of fruit and nuts annually while requiring less maintenance than typical suburban lawns. Here's what hillbilly farmers understood that modern horticulture forgot completely. Fruit trees aren't decorations or weekend hobbies. They're wealth-building systems that run on sunlight and time. They're anti-fragile infrastructure that keeps producing when supply chains break and grocery stores run short during disruptions. And they're multi-generational investments where one weekend of planting today creates 40 to 80 years of continuous harvest for your family. The lifetime economic calculation is staggering when you actually run the numbers. 7 trees, conservative yield estimates, 30 to 50 years of production, $500 to $1,500 annual value per tree equals $75,000 to $150,000 in food you won't buy over your lifetime. And that's just direct replacement value, completely ignoring superior nutrition quality, food security during supply disruptions, and the incalculable worth of teaching your children that abundance comes from design systems and observation, not dependence and consumption. You can stop paying and fighting. Design a self-regulating orchard based on relationships between plants, and you get time back instead of losing weekends to maintenance battles. This isn't new knowledge invented by permaculture experts. It's how humans fed themselves for 10,000 years before industrial agriculture convinced you that food comes from stores and orchards require professional expertise. Indigenous growers didn't use chemicals or constant intervention. They used observation. They planted polycultures. They worked with ecological relationships instead of fighting them. And they built food systems that sustained entire communities for centuries without external inputs. Here's the reality nobody tells you. Years 1 through 3, trees need establishment care. Water deeply once weekly if rain doesn't provide an inch. Mulch to suppress grass competition. Protect from deer and rabbits. Years 4 through 6, production starts light and maintenance drops dramatically because root systems are established and companion guilds are filling in. Year 7 onward, you're harvesting more than you can eat, and your main work becomes preservation and sharing surplus with neighbors. Time is the one resource you can never recover or replace. Every year you delay planting is a year of production lost forever that you can't get back. A tree planted this January gives you 40 years of harvest. A tree not planted gives you 40 years of grocery bills and dependence on distribution systems you don't control. These 7 trees separate families who talk about self-sufficiency from families who actually achieve it through action. Plant this winter while trees are dormant. Design guilds, not rows. Build soil, not dependence. And join the lineage of growers who understood that observation and relationships beat intervention and domination every single time.